This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
In this predominantly Shiite Muslim suburb of southern Beirut, an elderly Christian Lebanese woman refuses to leave her home and her neighbors, despite the reoccurring Israeli bombings of the area. It seems that Jeanne d'Arc is a model for Lebanese unity and steadfastness in the face of the Israeli war machine. We could not believe that anyone could still live here in what is now known as the Square of Destruction. We couldn't believe it until we entered her home and we found her, her husband, and her neighbor, who has been like a sister to her for a long time.
We have been together for 45 years, me and her, shoulder to shoulder.
Her name is Jeanne d'Arc, a Christian woman, 77 years old. Yes, a Christian woman living in the security square of Hezbollah. Above her head is a picture of the Virgin Mary, Mar Sharbil, and Imam Ali. It was one of the remarkable scenes we had seen. Her neighbor, Haja Fatima, is a Muslim woman who is younger than her by 2 years. Jeanne d'Arc and Haja Fatima share everything, even their steadfastness, in a room that is used for eating, sleeping, sitting, and welcoming guests.
God willing, we are staying here. God willing, I will never leave except when I go to God.
Her husband, Henna, who's 80 years of age, has left him with little to say, and he does not care about what is happening around him, even during the violent bombing. Her only child, Jeanne d'Arc, lives in Canada. Jeanne d'Arc's picture and the photos of her 3 children adorn the walls. Jeanne d'Arc, who refuses our help, could not refuse our offer to let her call her daughter using our phone. This scene had erased some of the fears that had been burning in our hearts since we first arrived in the security square.
Don't be afraid, God is with us. Don't you remember that last time we also stayed here?
Give me the phone to talk to her. Hello?
Haja Fatima also wants to speak to Jeanne d'Arc. She wants to reassure her that the birds remain steadfast with the family. The Israeli planes do not impact the purity of the birds' songs.
The birds are right next to me. Yes, I took pictures. I want you to see them. We have another bird, exclusively for Muhammad. Yes.
Enough. I want to talk to him.
These 2 women do not want anything. They do not want anything except peace at a time when peace remains unattainable for Israel's neighbors. Jeanne d'Arc remains here, in Security Square in the suburb of southern Beirut, despite all this destruction. This might defy all logic, but it also defies the Israeli military machine.
الجزيرة المربع الأمني لضاحية بيروت الجنوبية.
In Lebanon this afternoon, Israeli warplanes carried out 7 air raids on the southern suburbs of Beirut, the stronghold of Hezbollah. The raids initially targeted the outskirts of the headquarters of Hezbollah and the Khaik neighborhood in the southern suburb, which has been completely destroyed. The planes are also targeting other areas in the suburbs outside the Khaik neighborhood. These areas are being subjected to almost daily bombings since the start of the Israeli aggression against Lebanon on July 18. Here a report from Beirut about the developing conditions today.
يوم جديد من العدوان عاشت خلاله مدينة صور ليلة عنيفة من القصف الجوي.
The city of Tyre lived through another new day of aggression and violent nighttime air and naval bombings. Israeli warplanes carried out airstrikes on the villages of Shur, Beit Yahoun, Tibnin, Kfar Dunin, Al-Abbasiyya, Ziqim, and others. The Israeli war battleships anchored deep in the Lebanese regional waters participated in bombing the city and dozens of nearby villages using burning phosphorus bombs and cluster bombs. A new massacre took place in the city of Nabateeh. This is the 100th massacre in a series of continued crimes that have lasted 14 days, the length of Israel's aggression on Lebanon. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State's visit to the region has not produced any positive developments. According to the reality on the ground, it appears that the situation continues to deteriorate and is headed towards a new escalation.
من خلال الوقائع الميدانية أن الأمور لا تزال تنحى نحو تصعيد جديد.
America wants to drown the region in a state of created chaos. This is what is being said on all the neoconservative websites. They call it constructive chaos. Thus, today, the Americans have a project and they are not responding to anyone. They are not responding to anyone, not Europe, not Russia, not the Arabs, who are calling for a ceasefire. It wants to manufacture a new Middle East using the model of the sectarian war taking place in Iraq.
المعارك البرية بدت عنيفة بين المقاومة اللبنانية والجيش الإسرائيلي الذي حاول التقدم باتجاه مدينة بنت جبيل واعترفت.
The land battles appear violent between the Lebanese and the Israeli army, which tried to advance towards the city of Bint Jbeil. Israel acknowledged that the battle continues at the entrances of the city, where 4 Israeli soldiers were killed during the current clashes. Meanwhile, Israel continues to try to incite people against Hezbollah. Israeli warplanes dropped new leaflets on various Lebanese villages and cities condemning the resistance.
يوم جديد من المعاناة والمآسي.
A new day of tragedies and sufferings, with more torn body parts and collapsed buildings. The question remains, for how long will this war go on? Carolyn Baini, Dhabi TV, southern suburbs of Beirut.
الضاحية الجنوبية لمدينة بيروت.
Day 14 of the Lebanese campaign, and rockets continue to rain down on the north of Israel, 16 on Haifa alone. And again today, there have been casualties. We go live now to IBA's Eli Wagelerter in Haifa. Eli, what is the latest on today's attacks?
Yes, Yochanan, there have been quite a number of Katyushas that have fallen across the north today. Let me begin first with the fatalities. One 15-year-old Druze girl was killed when a rocket struck her home in the village of Marar near Carmiel. Here in Haifa, one resident died after going into cardiac arrest after the Katyushas landed here in the city. As for the wounded, about a dozen people were treated by Magen David Adom after the 16 rockets struck the city. Another 7 people were treated for shock. The attacks here in Haifa followed a few hours of relatively quiet time, leading the residents to become somewhat complacent. In fact, Yochanan, Mayor Yoni Yahav said at the scene that Hezbollah was setting a honey trap for the residents of Haifa. He said, quote, "They give us a few hours of quiet so people begin going out onto the streets and walking around like in Switzerland. Even I went to buy 2 cakes today." He urged residents to stay inside protected areas and sheltered buildings. Across the north, around 55 Katyushas fell by mid-afternoon today, hitting a number of communities, including Tzfat, Carmiel, Nahariya. But it was really a miracle, Yochanan. Most of the rockets fell in open areas and no one was seriously hurt from today's attack. Back to you.
Eli Wagelerter reporting from Haifa. Thanks, Eli, and stay safe. Meanwhile, following yesterday's battles, the Hezbollah stronghold of Bint Jbeil, which claimed the lives of 4 IDF officers, the army gained control of the town today. IBA's Dan Diker has that story.
The IDF took over the Hezbollah-controlled south-central Lebanese town of Bint Jbeil this morning. IDF sources say that Hezbollah terrorists took heavy casualties. The IDF also captured several Hezbollah operatives. Senior Army sources say that the IDF now determines the rules of the game there. Golani forces, paratroopers, and armored corps forces with Air Force support completed the mission. But this morning there were several firefight incidents between Hezbollah and the IDF. 4 soldiers were injured and evacuated to Nahariya in Israel for medical care. IDF sources estimate that up to 200 Hezbollah terrorists are still holed up in Beit Jabal. The town is considered the Hezbollah capital in southern Lebanon, home to 20,000 Shiites, many of whom have since fled north. IDF Operations Chief Major General Gadi Eisenkot said that there is evidence of Iranian involvement in the fighting. He said that the IDF is now in a good position to draw terrorists out of their hiding places in order to eliminate them. Eisenkot also said that Syrian weapons were being used by the Hezbollah in Beit Jabal. Meanwhile, the Israeli Air Force hit 15 rocket launching sites northeast of the Lebanese town of Tyre today. Other Hezbollah targets were also destroyed, including buildings and vehicles. The Air Force also destroyed a house in the town of Nabatea, killing a local man, his wife, and 5 children. Sources said it was not clear today why the house was targeted. Chief of Staff Dan Khalud said today that the Air Force has hit 270 targets over the past 24 hours, including 21 missile launchers, 50 Hezbollah buildings, and communications lines. He still warned, however, that Hezbollah rockets could hit Tel Aviv and other targets deep in Israel. Dan Diker, IBA News.
Prime Minister Fuad Signora visited injured citizens in Rafiq al-Hariri Hospital and talked about the Rome Conference as well as Rice's visit to Beirut.
Before traveling to Italy to take part in the Rome Conference, which will be held to help Lebanon, Prime Minister Fuad Signora, accompanied by Minister of Health Mahmoud Khalifa, visited a number of injured residents from southern villages that were targeted by Israeli air raids. 33 injured citizens, including 8 children, are receiving medical care in the Rafiq al-Hariri University Hospital. Signora listened to their complaints and requests, saying that he is working to find a permanent solution to stop the Israeli attacks.
May God help you.
Do you have any good news?
God willing.
We want good news. People are very afraid.
God willing, efforts are being exerted, but we still have not reached the point where we can tell people that they can have peace of mind. Absolutely. Exceptional efforts are taking place on several levels in order to put an end to these attacks against Lebanon for good.
Yesterday, Condoleezza Rice came to Lebanon. What is happening in this regard?
Without a doubt, we have been exchanging ideas. These ideas are being developed at all levels.
المفروض انه نشوفها بكره انا مره ثانيه بالتالي هالافكار بدها تصير تطويرها على
Rice went to Israel and I'm supposed to see her again tomorrow. These ideas have to be developed at the Israeli and Lebanese levels in conjunction with the American and European roles. Therefore, I am confident that true efforts are being exerted.
يعني هالمعاناة اللي عم نعانيها وعم بعانيها كل اللبنانيين أنا ثقتي إنه الصبح بده يطلع.
Despite the suffering that all Lebanese are enduring, I believe that peace will prevail. We want to resolve the issue of war prisoners and the issue of the Lebanese land that is still under occupation. We want to return this occupied land. Shaba must be returned to Lebanon.
شبعة بدها ترجع للبنان. ولازم ترجع للبنان. إن شاء الله إنه يعني بنوصل لحل نهائي.
God willing, we will reach a final solution so the Israeli attacks would not repeat. All Lebanese are united against the aggression. All Lebanese are also working to stop Israel from making other attempts. The Lebanese want a final solution so the Israeli attacks will not be repeated. They want the authority to be excluded to the Lebanese government and that no weapons be allowed outside its jurisdiction.
أن تصبح الدولة صاحبة السلطة الوحيدة وأن لا يكون هناك أي سلاح خارج سلاح السلطة الشرعية.
Gadir Shaito, a 15-year-old from the Al-Tireh village in Lebanon, sustained severe burns and injuries caused by the Israeli air raid, which targeted a van on the road between the villages of Kafra and Sedkin. This raid led to the martyrdom of 3 citizens and injured 14 others. The families of the victims have requested Prime Minister Faoud Siniora to work with the Lebanese Red Cross in order to retrieve the bodies of the martyred. These bodies are still in the van due to the continuous Israeli air raids.
The Islamic resistance has launched more than 100 missiles towards the cities of Haifa, Safad, Acre and Tiberias. Missiles even hit Kiryat Shmone settlements as the occupation prime minister was visiting it. The resistance missiles reached the settlements of Shlom, Naharia, Miskat Am and Manara, north of the occupied Palestine. So far, the shelling has killed more than 30 Israeli settlers in different areas that were hit by missiles. The sounds of Israeli soldiers yelling are being heard once again in Lebanon. These sounds are the first to be heard since Lebanon was liberated 6 years ago. The Islamic resistance announced that it has launched a counterattack, which shows that it still has the capability to take the initiative. According to the occupation army, the resistance destroyed 5 Merkavi Israeli tanks. The occupation said that 15 of its soldiers were either killed or injured. The occupation army has been trying to control the area for days, but it's still unsuccessful. A spokesman from the occupation said that fierce battles erupted as the Israeli occupation forces were trying to push their forces towards the Lebanese borders in an attempt to expand its military land operations. The Secretary General of Hezbollah, Mr. Hassan Nasrallah, confirmed in a press conference a few hours before the battle that the Israeli tanks will not be able to prevent the resistance from launching missiles toward the north of the occupied Palestine. He added that the Israeli military operations will not have any political significance unless it succeeds in stopping the shelling of settlements, which does not seem probable. The words of Nasrallah were confirmed a few hours later when more shells continued to hit Haifa and other cities of the occupation. The bombardment of Haifa and the tragic losses that Israel endured at the hands of the resistance started to have an impact on the Israeli entity. General Alon Friedman said that the army needs 10 additional days of military operations in order to decrease the number of missiles launched towards Israel. Then, the leader of the Northern Command, Odi Adam, said that the attack will continue for a few weeks and added that victory will happen when Hezbollah is removed from the border area and deprived of the ability to launch missiles. However, some opposition is beginning to rise, such as Atan Kapul, who said that the attempt to eliminate the military power of Hezbollah in Lebanon is an illusion. He also expressed disappointment about the way in which the military operations are being conducted. The leader of Meres party, Zahava Jenoun, accused the government of not standing up to their responsibilities to the northern settlements, where settlers are being displaced in an unprecedented manner.
التي تشهد حركة نزوح غير مسبوقة.
More than a dozen rockets fired by Hezbollah from Lebanon hit the port city of Haifa in northern Palestine today, wounding at least 5 Zionists, 3 of whom critically wounded in the salvos, which hit at least 1 house and 1 bus.
Rockets also fell on the northern town of Safed and the village of Malut. Naharia and some Jewish settlements were also targeted by Hezbollah rockets. In Haifa, a dozen rockets landed in the main part of the city and 4 in suburbs. 10 Zionists have been killed and dozens wounded by rocket fire in Haifa since the start of the Lebanon crisis on July the 12th. Fierce fighting also raged Tuesday between Israeli forces and Lebanese fighters around the border town of Beit Jabil, a Hezbollah military stronghold besieged by Israeli troops as they pushed deeper into Lebanese territory. A family of 7, including at least 2 children, was killed when an Israeli missile slammed into their home in southern Lebanon early Tuesday.
8 Palestinians were wounded Tuesday in Israeli airstrikes on 3 houses in the Gaza Strip. One house in eastern Gaza was reduced to rubble by one rocket, which caused 4 injuries. In the southern Gaza town of Rafah, 2 houses sustained massive damage in the air raid, where 4 other people were wounded. 114 Palestinians and 1 Zionist Israelis have been killed in fighting in the Gaza Strip since Israel launched a massive operation there on June the 28th. Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri on Tuesday described his talks with U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice as highly tense. He made the remarks in an interview with IRIB TV and said the preconditions proposed by U.S. top diplomat on, quote, the path to ceasefire are indicative of broad plans stabled by the Zionist regime far beyond the release of its 2 military forces. He further noted that Rice upheld no priority to stop the massacre of Lebanese people. Meanwhile, Palestinian Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh said the U.S. view of a new Middle East is one that began with destroying Lebanon and with killing the maximum number of Palestinians. Haniyeh said, we condemn the American positions which give the green light to the occupation to continue its aggressions. A Middle East tour has taken U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice to the occupied Palestine after an unannounced visit to Lebanon.
Over 2,000 Palestinians took to the streets of Ramallah Tuesday in a show of support for Hezbollah and against U.S. policies ahead of Rice's visit. The protesters walked through the center of the capital, where most of the shops closed down following calls of a general strike, shouting Bush is a criminal and the U.S. is a terrorist. Ralliers waved pictures of destruction caused by Israel's bombing in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, emblazoned with the words, "Is this a new Middle East?" They also shouted the slogans in support of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, brandishing pictures of the leader and shouting, "Oh, beloved Nasrallah, strike, strike Tel Aviv."
As Palestinians held a funeral procession for the martyr Qatar Taya, a victim of tank missiles that fell on a residential area in the northern Gaza Strip, the Israeli occupation forces intensified their air raids, targeting innocent civilians. The Palestinian leadership called on the international community to stop the Israeli aggression as a first step in finding a resolution in the region.
Amidst the sound of never-ending raids and mortar shellings, homes are collapsing with the residents inside as a result of the missiles being launched by Israeli warplanes day and night. 3 homes were destroyed by the Israeli bombings. 2 homes were in Rafah, and the 3rd was in the Shuja'iyah area east of Gaza City. The shrapnel from the missiles injured more than 10 civilians, but the missiles destroyed the targeted houses and damaged other homes, making families homeless and terrorizing innocent civilians.
The children, women, and men have all been made homeless. They are hitting everywhere, not just us. Look at our neighbors. Look at what happened to them. Look at what happened to these 4 homes as a result of the bombing of just 1 home. Why? Why do they do this?
In a scene that is often repeated, citizens held a funeral procession for the child, Qatar Taya, who had witnessed the massacre being committed by the tanks against the civilians. An Israeli missile burned the walls of the home where the child was with her family, hiding from the evil of the aggression which spares nobody.
The Palestinian message is clear. The aggression must stop immediately. The continuation of the Israeli military escalation will quickly draw this region into a new war. Until now, there is nothing new. President Abu Mazen insisted on the need to stop the aggression and stop this escalation before it goes out of control in the region.
ورغم سياسة القتل والتدمير الممنهجة وعدم استجابة.
Despite the policy of savage killing and destruction and the lack of Israeli response to repeated international calls to stop the aggression against both the Palestinian and the Lebanese people, the international community continues to act on a humanitarian level. Jan Egelin, the assistant to the Secretary General of the United Nations, inspected the destruction that was left behind by the occupation forces in Beit Hanun in the northern Gaza Strip, as well as the destruction to the main and only electricity generator in the center of the strip. Egelin criticized the Israeli aggression, describing what is happening as a tragedy being imposed on the people, calling for an end to it.
Of course, I will bring up the whole access issue. You cannot keep 1.4 million people.
ويبدو أن إسرائيل كما يرى المراقبون تحاول البحث عن وسائل.
Observers say that as Israel fails to make achievements in its war against Lebanon, it seems that it is looking for new ways to intensify the killing and destruction in Palestinian lands.
عادل الزعنون تلفزيون فلسطين غزة.
And joining us live now from Beirut to tell us about the latest developments is Mr. Hanna Anbar, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Star newspaper. Regarding the position of the Lebanese people, today the UN Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, called for the end of hostilities because of the deteriorating humanitarian situation. We hear of a lot of Lebanese who have moved from the south complaining of lack of utilities, lack of humanitarian aid. The International Red Cross is calling to allow a safe haven in order to provide supplies to the Lebanese civilians. Is the situation as complex as how the international relief agencies are explaining it to be?
I think it's much more serious, because there are areas that all these organizations cannot get to. We get bits and pieces by telephone from these villages, and the description of what's happening there is beyond anybody's comprehension. And they all look at what's coming from the United Nations as just like talk. This is the chance for the United Nations to prove that it is worthy of the mandate that it has been given by the world to take care of conflicts like this. And the people here think that the United Nations is acting on the rhythm of the agenda of the US government. Definitely the supporters of Hezbollah have not become less. As a matter of fact, what has taken place is a factory for creating extremists and militants who have lost everything they have. And there is nothing more to lose. And they feel left on their own. So their only lifesaver is Hezbollah, whatever that means.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters, or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.